Well, hey now, Brawlers, Baba Booey to you all. It is time for another stupendous top 10 list. Yes, it has been a while. I just haven't had the inclination to do a top 10 list since there's been so many good games coming out that I wanted to spend my time reviewing instead. But I do enjoy doing my top 10 list, which amounts to me just loving talking. I just love to talk, if you haven't noticed. So it's been overdue. I've been wanting to get all of this out there for you to consume, and now it's time for another one. And this time we're going to look at the top 10 game publishers, my personal top 10. Now, how did I go about making this list? There's a lot of different game publishers out there, and there's a lot of very good ones. Personally, my thought is that if you are, especially for these up-and-coming publishers, if you've taken the time and effort to be a game publisher, then you already have a healthy amount of my respect. Because even though I'm not intimately familiar with all that goes into publishing a game, developing a game, everything that it takes to bring it to market, I know for a fact that it is not easy, and it doesn't make a lot of money. So, I mean, you think the game designers don't make a lot of money. I'm sure while publishers probably make a little more, there's also probably a lot more stress for the publisher. So it probably equals out. So it's definitely a labor of love. That's why people do it. That's why people design games, and that's why people publish games, why they go into that field. Because while we're in a golden age of board gaming and it's more popular than ever, it is still nowhere near, say, video games. It's just not. Maybe one day it will be. Probably not. But for now, it's not so popular that people can just start a publishing company and start raking in the dough. You have to love it. You have to be willing to put up with all the stress that's involved. And so even if you make games that I don't necessarily like, as long as you're not doing anything shiesty, my fictitious hat that's not actually on my head because my head is too big for hats, I tip my fictitious hat to you. So what's the criteria that I set for the publishing companies that I did choose? What sets these 10 apart? Well, it's not enough for you to just have made a game that I like, because there's a lot of companies that have made a game that I like, but they might have only made 1 or 2 games that I like. And maybe they're not the best when it comes to customer service or actually being in tune with the community. Those are all factors that I took into account when I was considering what companies to choose. I was also looking for up-and-coming companies that have a lot of momentum and that are bringing some new and unique and fresh ideas to the gaming market. And well, and I'm not gonna lie, you're not gonna find a lot of heavy Euro game companies on my list because those are not my type of games. And to be totally honest, I'll just go ahead and say it now. Company like Mayfair is not going to be on this list, nor is Rio Grande Games going to be on this list. And it's not just because they publish a lot of games that I have no interest in, although that's certainly a huge part of it. It's also because, and I think there are some people that would agree with me, they really haven't been setting the publishing world on fire. There's companies that are almost as old as them that are still finding new, fresh, unique ideas to bring to market, whereas those companies have kind of stagnated in some ways. So I'm looking for new blood. I'm looking for companies that consistently put out great games or that have great ideas and that I think are going to be doing great things in the future. So without further ado, here are my top 10 game publishers. First company I'm going to talk about, my number 10, is Victory Point Games. This is a very unique company in a few ways. From what I understand, I guess the word for it would be sort of a grassroots publishing company. They bring in fledgling designers, try to let them flourish by creating unique designs. They definitely cut some corners on components in order to push out as many games as possible. If you ever get a Victory Point game, if it's a bigger game, you're more than likely going to get the famous Victory Point napkin, which is a napkin with their logo on it that you use to wipe the soot off of the counter sheet that comes with the game, because they use some sort of laser cutter that cuts it in a way that leaves a lot of soot that a lot of other companies somehow can avoid that. They also don't cut their cards correctly, which as working in the printing industry for like 17 years, that just bugs the hell out of me, that all the cards are cut improperly. And they must be doing them by hand with a hand cutter, because if it was an industrial strength cutting machine, it would not look like that. But I digress. Aside from those somewhat dubiously unique things, they just put out some really innovative games. 2 of my personal favorites are Darkest Night, which is a thematic cooperative game that's sort of like Pandemic, but in my opinion blows Pandemic out of the water. You have Trieste, which is a 3-player only game, which is just so unique, and I don't know that any other company would have been able to put it out there. It's such a simple but awesome game. There's other unique ones, like their new game, Who Stole the Cookie? I mean, they're all over the place as far as theme goes, but that's a good thing. They have a good variety of games. Most gamers actually know them for war games. Most of them are very complicated war games, a lot of solitaire-only games, and even some of their multiplayer games can be played solitaire, so they have a huge emphasis on that. There's a zombie game I've been dying to try called Dawn of the Zeds, which is like a war game mixed with a zombie game that's single player only, where you're trying to like survive the zombie apocalypse. I mean, they have so many cool and unique ideas. By having all of these games sort of homebrewed with less than stellar components, they can keep their costs low and publish a lot of different games. So there's some ups and downs to that, but I am certainly glad they exist, and I'm glad that they're trying all of these new things. And I think that their template of, like what I say, the grassroots type of game publishing is something that I'd like to see other game companies try, especially up-and-coming game publishers. It's something that they should look into because it's certainly been working for Victory Point Games, which is my number 10 game publisher. My number 9 is ZMan Games. Now, ZMan Games is probably most notable for the European games that they've brought over into the North American market. Really, really popular ones like Agricola and Carcassonne, just to name a couple. And I don't even like those games that much, but you really have to respect a publisher who knows how to pick some games, that's for sure. And Agricola, they picked, a number of years ago when it wasn't even as huge as it is now, and of course it's just become immensely popular. But there are other games that it brought over that I really, really love, and therefore give ZMan even more respect. We are talking about small games like No Thanks and Fairy Tale, up to big games like Yggdrasil, and of course Robinson Crusoe, which is just such an awesome game, and they really lucked out getting that game. I mean, it's been hugely popular, and for a very good reason. But it would be enough if they just were a good publisher and a good scout for talent from Europe, so to speak. But they've actually brought out unique games. They've published their own games that are just amazing. And of course, the most notable of that is, if I can even speak, is Pandemic. And I know when I was talking about Darkest Night for Victory Point Games, and it sounded like I was bashing Pandemic. But even though I think Darkest Night is a better game and more thematic for my taste, Pandemic is awesome. It's such a well-designed game that so many other games have tried to emulate. Certainly, I don't think the Darkest Night would exist without Pandemic. And that designer just keeps bringing out more and more new things to add to it to make it into a unique experience. And ZMan is just supporting that and just letting it flourish into a fantastic game. They're bringing out a new game called The Battle at Kemble's Cascade. I think I'm pronouncing that correctly. That's coming out this year that just looks incredibly innovative and unique, where it's like a board game simulating a classic arcade shoot 'em up. I mean, so they have a lot of fresh ideas, while at the same time they know how to pick fantastic games from around the world. They're bringing out Tragedy Looper. I mean, I never would have imagined that. I reviewed the original Japanese version of Tragedy Looper, and I was like, no one's ever going to pick this up. And like a few months later, boom. Zeb Schlesinger, who I've actually had the pleasure of meeting, is saying, I saw an article of him playtesting it because he's releasing it over here. He was the owner of ZMan Games. I think now he's just like their head consultant. But I mean, the fact that they're scouting those unique games and they're bringing those out alongside games that are new and unique for themselves, that is just a sign of a good company. ZMan Games, definitely my number 9. I could definitely even see them going further up in this list in the years to come. My number 8 choice might be a little bit controversial because there was a time where Wizkid was down and out. They were either almost bankrupt, completely bankrupt, and people were not happy with the way they were handling some of their stuff, like discontinuing the Mage Knight line of figurines. And I mean, and even now, there are some games that they put out that people are just not happy with. But I'll tell you what, the games that they put out that are great are really great. and it more than makes up for it. The few that top off my head that I can think of, first off, Quarriors. Quarriors, which has given birth to Marvel Dice Masters, the entire Dice Masters line. They have put so much time, money, and effort into that game, that whole line of dice-themed games, and it's just amazing what they were able to accomplish, because it is not cheap to publish those, to make those dice, to produce them, and to bring in awesome talent to actually make and design these games, like Eric Lang and Mike Elliott, and not even counting the Mage Knight, the board game. They took their old Mage Knight miniatures game, which was just completely dead, and they bring in a very popular Eurogame designer, Vlaada Chvátil, and said, make a game out of this. And lo and behold, it's just this incredibly intricate, complex game, so much different than everything that they've done, and immensely popular. I think it's still in the top 10, even if just barely, on Board Game Geek, of total board games. And, I played it. It used to be in my collection. It was just a little bit too heavy for me at the time, but I've been yearning to play it again. That, combined with the ease and accessibility of Quarriors and Dice Masters, gives you those two ends of the spectrum, and it gives me hope that WizKids is just going to flourish and be even more of an amazing company. They certainly have the capability, they have the manufacturing prowess, they have all these cool licenses like the Lord of the Rings and Marvel that they could use, and even DC, because they have like the Batman Gotham City strategy game, the new Justice League game. They're probably, Batman wasn't a phenomenal game, but it definitely had incredible potential. It was one of the best uses of a popular license that I've seen. So they have the chops, they can use these licenses to make great games, and that is definitely saying something. So therefore, WizKids is easily my number 8. My number 7 is AEG, otherwise known as Alderac Entertainment Group, and it's a hard company to pin down. Because on the one hand, they have very heavy, deep Euro games, but on the other hand, they have very, very small, simple micro games. And I think it's that juggling that balance and having that diversity, which is really going to lead to them being an even bigger and better company as the years go by, and they're definitely hitting their stride in popularity at this moment. You can start, of course, with Love Letter, such a simple, small game, but man, has that really just blew up the market in the last couple of years since its release. And I guess any company could have chosen that game and published it over here, but AEG had the intuition to do so, and it's definitely led to a lot of success for them. But on the other spectrum, you have these much heavier games that are definitely gamerly games. You have all the other games in the Tempest line that Love Letter was sort of thrust into. You have Dominaire, you have Courtier, you have Canalis, that are not like super uber heavy, but they're definitely more complex games that that have a big footprint on the table. You have Thunderstone, which is still my favorite deck builder. It's just a fantastically thematic, deep, complex deck building game. Lots of strategy involved. I love the epic variant of it, and they did the right thing when they put out Thunderstone Advance and all the different expansions they have out for it. They're giving fans what they want, and that's a wonderful thing. They've made a lot of other wise decisions, like partnering with other Japanese designers, because Love Letter was originally from Seiji Kanai, who was a Japanese game designer. They're bringing over all the rest of his games. They're tapping into other popular designers and bringing out games like Sail to India. And they brought over popular Euro games like Istanbul. Istanbul is one of the Spiel des Jahres nominees, and it's a fantastic game, and they knew to bring that one over. So it tells a lot about a company when they can both release their own really unique, really cool properties, but also know how to selectively pick hot properties overseas and before they're even hot, and just make them into this phenomena. So that leads to it easily being my number 7, AEG, Alderac Entertainment Group. And here's where people start yelling at the screen. Nobody is going to accuse my number 6 game publisher, Cool Mini or Not, of being perfect. Cool Mini or Not has made its success on Kickstarter. They really showed the rest of the board gaming market, and continue to show the rest of the board gaming market, how you can get things done on Kickstarter. They are still the behemoth to beat on that platform. Now, because of that, of course, there are people that just hate Kickstarter and see Cool Mini or Not as the example of everything that's wrong with Kickstarter and with modern board gaming. And people aren't happy because some of their games are delayed and they don't arrive exactly as they should. But I will tell you this, I am not going to defend everything that ZMan does, as they're popularly called, but if you think that even regular standard board game publishers who don't use Kickstarter don't make mistakes like this, well, that's just because you don't hear about them. ZMan is in the public eye much more and has brought more notoriety to the board gaming community from outside, people who were not interested in board games. And because of all of that focus and attention on them, their faults are much more highlighted. And, you know, nothing is perfect. There's so many bits and pieces in every board game, but especially in the board games that Cool Mini or Not puts out, that you cannot expect them to be perfect. If you want to look at what they're, putting that aside, look at the positive things that they've done. They have released huge, grandiose board games with magnificent components that are actually good, fun games. You may not like zombie games, but it is no fluke, and it is not just because of the miniatures that Zombicide is as popular as it is. It is an incredibly fun, thematic, cooperative experience. It is unique, innovative. You have these modular boards. You can make your own scenarios. You can make it competitive, you can make it semi-cooperative. There's all these different unique things going into it, and it is just an experience like no other. And they could have just rested on their laurels with that game, but they had their hand in publishing Super Dungeon Explorer, another miniatures game that feels completely different and amazing and thematic. It feels like Gauntlet the board game. It has a completely different art style than Zombicide. They have Arcadia Quest coming out, and the early buzz on that game is that it is going to be wonderful and phenomenal. You have games like Xenoshift, which is their first major not miniatures game, that is another cooperative experience that has completely different theme, completely different artwork. The variability of their games, the quality of their components, their absolute push towards being a dedicated board gaming company that is just focused on making their own unique products and bringing in talent to publish exclusively through them, you have to respect that despite their faults. I still maintain that despite the fact that some of their projects are late, despite the fact that there are errors that they strive to correct as much as possible, despite those faults, they still run a good Kickstarter campaign. They're an example of how good Kickstarter could be, and they just publish great games. So I'm going to give them my love at number 6 and expect them to go higher on this list in the future. I talked earlier on this list about companies like ZMan and AEG who are really good at scouting out foreign companies and foreign games and bringing them over to the North American audience, and how that's a sign of a great publisher. But I don't want you to think that I'm like some uber nationalist that only cares about American companies that can find European talent. I think there's a lot to be said for my number 5, Asmodee, who is able to find talent worldwide. They're a worldwide publishing company, and they're able to find awesome games and awesome development companies and bring their products to every other part of the world, and that is definitely something to be respected. But they have their own homebrew games as well, and 2 of them are amongst my favorite game. In fact, one of them is my favorite game of all time still, and that is Seasons. So of course I'm going to give them some extra bonus points for that. But then you have games like Dixit, and both of those games are just amazingly innovative, beautiful games. That's something you can say about a lot of Asmodee's games, that they are just beautiful to behold. They're just so innovative, and their style is so great, and they know how to pick games that are amazing from different parts of the world and distribute them worldwide. And I was really shocked to see some of the games from North America that they decided to distribute, like Ascension and Manhattan Project. These are great games that other parts of the world are, we think in our own little corner of the world that, oh, Manhattan Project, just assume that other countries are going to be able to play that game. But unless another publishing company from overseas picks it up, that's not going to happen. We only think of ourselves a lot of times when we're thinking about games being imported, but not how our fantastic games are going to reach other parts of the world. And Asmodee is at the forefront of making that happen. And total props for doing that. Asmodee is easily my number 5. I love board games that have theme. That is no secret whatsoever. But when a game has great theme and great components together with that, that just puts it into another stratosphere. Those two things can't save a game that has awful mechanics, but man, do they go a long way towards helping it. And it just so happens that my number 4 game publisher, Wizkid Games, has awesome theme, awesome artwork and style, awesome components, and more often than not, awesome mechanics. We cannot start this conversation without talking about Kemet. Kemet is one of the... I can't believe I haven't reviewed this yet. I definitely need to get around to it, especially now that there's another expansion coming out. Kemet is just an awesome game that is so... It's just awesome components, awesome style, awesome theme, so fun. And Wizkid was responsible for that. Then you look at a game like Takenoko, and even if you don't have the collector's edition like I do, even the normal game is just stunning, just beautiful to look at, and such a fun, simple, light-hearted game that I would recommend to anyone as a gateway game, but even for a more serious gamer, it's just awesome. There's new games like Origin, which are just beautiful to behold, really, really fun. It's abstract, but just anyone can get into it. You can teach it to anybody. There's Corto back there somewhere that is like nothing I've ever seen as far as how it looks and the theme and the presentation. It looks like you're playing through a comic storybook. There's even games that, mechanically speaking, I don't like that much, like Giants. To behold Giants, to hold those pieces, to see the theme of putting up these statues come to life, that almost made me keep that game. And sometimes I kind of wish I had just to have it. And this is a board game we're talking about. It can sound superficial to harp on the components and the artwork so much, but that's what this medium is. It goes a long way towards bringing new people into the hobby and getting people interested and invigorated into games. And Wizkid is right there in the front lines of bringing in new gamers as far as I'm concerned. If I'm thinking about games that I want new gamers to try, those are some of the games that pop into my head immediately because they are a spectacle, and that is a great thing. And I mean, they do other, there's so many games I could talk about. Room 25, which is a smaller game, not as grandiose, but just so fun that they took a chance on that even. All these unique themes and ideas. I'm telling you, Wizkid is one to watch. They are, as far as I'm concerned, they're just getting started. So keep an eye on them for sure. Totally easily. I know you're getting sick of me hearing me saying easily, but definitely easily my number 4. Okay, I know I said that I'm not an uber nationalist, but I am going to show a little bit of pride here in my number 3, and that's Plaid Hat Games. They are homegrown right here in the US. In fact, in my home state of Ohio. I live in Florida now, but I grew up in Ohio for my first 17 years, and it wasn't the greatest experience in the world, but I have a tiny smidge of pride about that. Plaid Hat Games is based out of Columbus, I believe, and they have self-published all of their own games. They don't import any other games. They've brought in some talent, but they make their own unique games, and they are all thematic. They are all beautiful to look at, fantastic art, fantastic theme. It all started with Summoner Wars a few years ago, which was a lot of people at the time were like, oh, it's just a ripoff of Magic, but no, it's not. It is such a unique experience that I think blows any other CCG out of the water. And there's other companies that have just focused on, they have a hit and they just focus on that. And they don't worry about anything else. They keep their day job and they just keep pumping out more and more for that game. And while there has been a lot more Summoner Wars and more to come, it is to the credit of Colby Dowk and everyone else on the Plaid Hat team that they have diversified and made some other amazing games while at the same time keeping the Summoner Wars coming. But they have put out Dungeon Run, which I think is an underrated game and that definitely deserves more love. Mice and Mystics, so I think that we have not yet seen, or we can't yet quantify what a huge impact Mice and Mystics has had on the board gaming hobby as a whole. As far as its ability to bring in younger gamers, families who may not have been interested in anything other than Monopoly and Candyland. People who are typically play RPGs who are like, wow, that's like an RPG in a box. That's just so simple to bust out and play through this beautiful story and beautiful components. I mean, that game is just amazing, and it's just a testament to the creativity that's flowing out of Plaid Hat. And then you have BioShock, The Siege of Columbia, which they got this major license for a video game, and people were like, how are they going to do that? Most licensed games sucks, but they made this big, grandiose war game that fits thematically into that universe, and it's just a joy to play. And coming soon, and I was a playtester for this game, I played it 11 times, so I can tell you that it's amazing, is Dead of Winter, which is the new hotness. It was the hotness at Origins and all these recent conventions. Supposedly it's coming out at Gen Con. I hope I have my copy before then. And wow, it's so good. And it just keeps getting better and better from that company. They've had some missteps. City of Remnants was not that great. And, you know, like I said, some people, I like Dungeon Run, other people didn't. But even so, the fact that they are such a young company, but they've put out such amazing games, means that they can only go up from here. There's so much potential in that company. I love any company that devotes itself to theme and making an experience of a game, not just a methodical play-by-the-numbers game. I'm telling you, there's some great stuff going on over there, and, you know, I expect them to maybe even get even higher on this list, because they've got some things in the works that are just going to be amazing. That's Plaid Hat Games, my number 3. Most game publishers would find the prospect of releasing one game a year a losing proposition, that there's just no way they could sustain that business model and make money, and they would be going out of business soon. But somehow or another, my number 2, Days of Wonder, has made it work. Well, it's actually not a mystery at all. The fact is, they put out games that are not only stunning to behold. I mean, I talked a lot about how Matago Games had some stunning games coming out, but they learned a lot of what they're doing from Days of Wonder, I'm sure. Days of Wonder is the elder statesman of fantastic looking and fantastic components in games, and that's just part of why they're so amazing. They actually tie fantastic games to those components. And I mean, look no further than Shadows over Camelot. That is probably my number 2 or number 3 game of all time. And it is just amazing, component-wise, gameplay-wise. It is an experience like no other. There's a lot of other trader games, cooperative games with that trader aspect, but nothing quite like that. And while it's just one game, I mean, it's just huge bonus points for Days of Wonder for taking a chance on it. And the expansion to it was even more amazing. But other games that they've released have kept that bar high. Small World is so good. I mean, I don't even know. Small World and Shadows over Camelot, neck and neck. Fantastic games, thematic games. They look beautiful. They're so unique and different and just variable than any other games in my collection. You have games like Relic Runners, which their last release last year, which was just looked incredible and was completely different from everything else they've released. So the idea of running through the jungle trying to get treasure, more of an abstract puzzly game than other games that they produce. You have Cleopatra, the Society of Architects, which is just a very strange theme, but the idea of it works out very cool, and you're actually building, you know, this temple and this pyramid and all these obelisks and things like that. And games like, you know, Mystery Express, which wasn't my cup of tea, but there is no other game like that. People say that it's like Clue, but it is its own thing. And, you know, so many other games. They have the new game coming out this year called, oh man, I'm blanking out. I think it's 5 Tribes, which already looks awesome and different, and that's the most important thing. It's just different. If you're only releasing one game a year, as long as it's an amazing game that's different than everything else on the market, you can sustain that model, and that's what Days of Wonder has done. And oh yeah, they make a little game called Ticket to Ride, which, you know, I'm not even a huge fan of that, but that game has broken through, and that keeps the lights on over at Days of Wonder, and you gotta respect them for that, for taking a chance on a game that's so simple but that has captured the imagination of almost the entire board gaming community. Days of Wonder, my number 2. So finally we come to my number 1, and all throughout the rest of the list I illustrated what my criteria is for a good game publisher. And I brought up things like thematic games, great components, great style, innovation in gameplay design, a consistent line of games that are consistently either just good or fantastic, and the ability to bring in talent, find other games, reprint them, make them available to a wider audience. All of these things are signs for me of a great game publisher, and I think that Fantasy Flight Games does that better than anyone else, more consistently than anyone else. When I was putting this list together, it was certainly one of the first companies I thought of, probably the first one I thought of. And as I was finding, I mean, this was a tough list. I easily had like 16 different companies that would be considered for this list. And I thought, well, maybe it won't be Fantasy Flight my number 1. They'll be on the list, but maybe they'll be lower. But when the dust settled, there's no way I couldn't put them as number 1. They hit every criteria. They make big, stunning, thematic games with awesome components, awesome artwork, and great mechanics. And innovative things. They developed the concept of the living card game. Certainly they were not the first person to make a card game that had set expansion that was not collectible. But the model that they've used, the way that they've done it, the huge variety of games in their lineup. Obviously, the big daddy right now is Netrunner, which is just such a unique experience. And this is another example of them not just developing this game, but picking this game up out of, mothballs, this dead game of Netrunner, and resurrecting it and putting this new coat of polish on it and releasing it in a completely different and unique way than the way it was originally released, and making it into just this phenomenon. But at the same time, their other LCGs offer an even more unique and new experience. You've got the Lord of the Rings LCG, which is completely cooperative. You have the Warhammer Invasion, the upcoming Warhammer 40k, the Call of Cthulhu. And that segues us into all the Call of Cthulhu line of games that they have. They had Arkham Horror, and that was an okay game. But I mean, people loved it. I mean, they totally supported it. They had a tremendous amount of expansions, more and more and more. They gave the people what they wanted, and then they decided to do Eldritch Horror. And people said, "Oh, well, they're just re-theming. They're just kind of, just rejiggering the other Arkham Horror. Oh, big whoop!" And guess what? It is amazing. It blows Arkham Horror out of the water. This is a company that is not afraid to try new things and improve on the old stuff, and that is just incredible. Another example I just cannot help but mention is Cosmic Encounter, another game that they pulled out of mothballs and just made into this stunning presentation. More and more expansions. They're continuing to support it, and people love it. They're giving the people what they want. They were half of the reason that Merchant of Venus was able to be reprinted. I hate that game, but there's people that love it, and it's just so out of the wheelhouse of what they usually do, but they took a chance. They made an awesome production of it. I definitely cannot complain about the components. And so many other things I can talk about. Descent. That's another one that they developed this game in-house with Descent in their Terranoth universe. They create universes at Fantasy Flight. They created this game Descent set in the games like Runebound and Rune Wars and things like that. And it was popular. And then they said, you know what, we're going to redo it. And people cried foul, and they said, you're just trying to cash in by releasing a new edition like they do with, with Magic and with Dungeons and Dragons. But you know what? Second edition, amazing. Totally blew the old one out of the water, and now people are gleefully buying it. Whether you look at that with a cynical eye or not, they know what they're doing over there. They know about production value. They know about fun games. Twilight Imperium. Rex. These are amazing games that are deep, complex. They are both the epitome of Ameritrash, while at the same time being deeply strategic, thought-provoking games. Fantasy Flight Games is one of the most mysterious companies out there. They don't do anywhere near the amount of public relations that other companies do. They're sort of monolithic at this point. They're certainly not going anywhere. People say that the day that you see Fantasy Flight Games use Kickstarter is the day where the entire empire of board gaming comes crumbling down. Don't expect that anytime soon. But even despite that, there is good reason why they're up on a pedestal. They are simply amazing in every way. They've had some missteps, sure, like any other company, but when you want to talk about consistently putting out thematic, grandiose, awesome playing, games that tell a story, Fantasy Flight Games is where it's at. Those are all the best criteria I use to judge a game publisher, and that's why they absolutely deserve to be my number one. Well, people, that's my top 10 list, and now I want to hear from you. I want you to tell me how absolutely wrong I was. I want you to tell me how absolutely right I was. I want you to tell me how half my list is awesome and half my list sucks, and everything in between. I don't expect everyone to agree with all of my picks. Certainly some of my picks are a little bit controversial, but even if you do like all of my picks, I'm sure that there are companies you think should have knocked some of those other companies out. I mentioned in my number one, Fantasy Flight, that I had a lot of different picks that could have made this list. I had at least 16 or 17 companies that I think were worthy of the top 10, but I just could not fit all of them in. Companies that are just too young, but that have done amazing stuff, like Wizkid Games with Star Realms and Stonemaier Games with Euphoria and Viticulture. These are companies that give me tremendous hope for the future of board gaming, and in the future they could easily make it on this list once they have a few more games under their belt. People think that the board gaming bubble is going to burst soon. I completely disagree. When I see new up-and-coming companies like these and like Plaid Hat Games that are just consistently putting out good products, good thematic, rich products that people love, that people that are outside of the world of board gaming love, and then it brings them into the fold, that is a fantastic sign of things to come. And the only other thing I would implore you to do is to support these publishers. You don't have to like every game that a publisher puts out, and certainly I do not like every game that every publisher puts out, but if you do love some of their catalog, you should support them. Not just monetarily. You can go on areas like Board Game, you can talk about the games that you love, you can give them thumbs, you can promote them, you can introduce their games to other people. I mean, publishers, you know, some of them make a lot of money, a lot of them don't. They have very stressful jobs, and they're trying to, you know, put out the best product that they can. Like I said in the beginning, this is a labor of love for them. Publishers and designers need our help so that they can continue to make these products that we consume and that we love so much. And that, to me, is part of what I love so much about this hobby, that we have this community, that we can help each other and have this feedback going back and forth. So that was a little long-winded, but I love board gaming, and I want to see the publishers that I love that put out consistent good work do well and succeed. And let me know what you think, because hopefully you feel the same way. My name is Nick, this has been Board Game Brawl, and I'm reminding you to get out there and game every day in every way. Take care.